In today's episode, I'm talking with Kabri Lehrman-Schmid. Kabri has managed billion-dollar projects. So when you want to talk about project management, she's deep into it. But she talked about something that was really interesting in this episode. She talked about the state of mental health and diversity and inclusion in the architecture, engineering, and construction world, and how we can take it from a philosophy that people are very interested in or a trend and make it real and bring it down to the ground. And when I say that, I mean not just talk about it at the corporate level, but actually make it felt on construction sites for professionals working every single day on these project-related tasks. She is an amazing project manager, and her thoughts on this episode on these topics, I believe, will be industry-changing. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Before we dive in, we'd like to recognize our sponsor for this episode, PPI, a leader in engineering exam prep for the FE and PE exams. PPI provides expert prep courses and study resources designed to help you pass the FE and PE exams the first time. PPI's live online courses include hours of lectures, problem-solving demonstrations, exam strategy sessions, office hours, and a passing guarantee. Check out PPI today at ppi2pass.com to see all the options available for FE and PE exam prep. Now let's dive into today's episode.
All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the podcast for today. Kabri Lehrman-Schmid is a project superintendent at HENSEL PHELPS. Kabri, I want to welcome you to the Engineering Project Management Podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
No, we're thrilled to have you. I know you've had a lot of experience in project management, and we're just thrilled that you're going to share with our listeners. So to get us started, Kabri, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do on a daily basis at HENSEL PHELPS?
So I'm a project superintendent with HENSEL PHELPS. We're a nationwide general contractor and building services provider. I'm currently working in the Seattle area. I've been up here 9 years, but I started my career over in the DC area, moved to the Bay Area, and now up here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. Most of my career has been on aviation and higher education campus projects, and that's totaling about $1.9 billion work in place. And so just thinking in terms of the size of projects, that's my perspective.
Wow.
I've been in the industry for 17 years, and my last 3 projects have really solidified for me a unique approach and the opportunities that I have. My career's been spent on both the project management and office administrative side, as well as field leadership. And so the last 3 projects I've been on, I've had the amazing opportunity to work as a design manager in pre-construction and then actually run all the work in the field as the project superintendent. And so at my current role, my title is technically project leader because my client is looking for a single point of contact with the general contractor to bridge that communication in pre-construction through construction between the design team, the stakeholder groups, and all of the field operations. And so this is going to be a $2 billion aviation program for a terminal renovation at SEA, which is formerly known as SeaTech.
Wow. So you're not busy.
We're not in construction yet, so it'll get busier.
All right. Well, that's great. Well, again, you've got a wealth of experience, I'm sure, and knowledge, so we're happy to have you. So let's just jump right in here. In your opinion, Kabri, how does trust kind of impact the dynamics and outcomes of engineering projects, particularly in the projects you work on, aviation and higher education construction?
This is such a passion topic for me. I've had the incredible fortune over my career to work on projects with some really visionary owners and team leaders who sought to prioritize team dynamics in search of that greater efficiency that they hope to find in the project. That included innovation and how we were going to co-create outcomes, but it also was a desire for creating a type of team dynamic and just the general pleasure that we find in the industry, recognizing that. Some of these projects were progressive delivery models like design build or integrated design build. The project I'm on now is called GCCM. It's like a CM at risk type model. But I don't think that the contract type is essential to building trust on teams. It's essential that we look for trust on our project teams because it helps us to clarify intent of what we're doing, what we're performing and bringing to the team. It improves our communication and it solidifies the goals. So those positive actions, I mentioned co-creation, alignment of values, and the recognition of the team's humanity, because there's just so many people bringing very specific skill sets to the table. We need to find ways to build relationships that tap into those. When you apply trust to aviation and higher education sectors specifically, I think there are two unique considerations that benefit from trust. One, the presence of the public. So whether those are travelers, campus workers, or students, depending on which campus you're on, you're always looking to find a way to demonstrate your commitment to their safety and to recognize that that is the service model, the metric of success that your owners group is looking at, how to serve those people. And then the other item is large stakeholder groups. So when you got a campus, you have an airport, when you have a college, university campus, you have a very large and varied stakeholder group that has extreme technical expertise that usually knows nothing about construction. And so you're finding ways to build trust with people who are such experts in very specific skills and strategies. They want to know that you're as committed to your work and need to recognize the value of what that construction process brings. And so when trust gets applied to these large projects, it's a lot about how we communicate our commitment to the project, the stakeholders, and their focus, which is the public.
Wow, that's powerful. And I think, and I'll just, giving you the perspective of someone who worked as a design engineer for my engineering career, I think the reason I asked that question is because a lot of times when you think about construction as a design engineer, the word mistrust would come to mind as opposed to trust when you're dealing with contractors. And again, I don't want to stereotype anyone. I'm just telling you what, that's what we think of. So I wanted to ask you that question because I know you have some, a lot of thoughts around that. And the way you expressed it was great because you can't get these projects done. The size and the type and the complexity of projects that you're working on don't get done unless you have a team that's bought in and they really trust one another for all the different reasons that you kind of just layered out there. So it's an important thing for those of you listening about to spend some time on early on in your relationships and early on in your projects to lay the groundwork for that, because that's going to benefit you going forward. So that being said, kind of building off of that, let me ask you a little bit about the general contractor. How does the general contractor or the GC kind of act as a gatekeeper for building psychological safety on these projects?
Oh, I love this question so much because I am such a proponent of one being anti-stereotype and overcoming what is in truth like that disconnect of the understanding of what contractors are responsible for and also owning our role in the project. And so let's maybe define psychological safety first so you know the perspective I'm coming from. I would say psychological safety is the application of the trust we just talked about to our daily operations. And so the idea of psychological safety has been discussed for years now in general business, but when it relates to construction, the idea of improving interpersonal communication so that you can facilitate more transparency, you can build those mechanisms for trust. It requires us creating an environment where somebody feels that they won't be punished for speaking up, for suggesting an idea, or for admitting a mistake, which is the general idea of psychological safety. As a contractor, we play a very unique role where we stand between the development of the project's vision and its completion.
Yeah.
Whether that's the contractually well-defined responsibility that you find in progressive delivery models like design build, where literally we are the person holding that, or just any design bid build type project, there's a huge transition that happens between the development of that design and that vision with the ownership group and design team and handing it off to somebody else to execute, right? And so when you think about being that person who's responsible for the translation and communication between those phases, I'm often in the position to facilitate the accuracy of that communication. But more so, I need to recognize the role I play in affecting the value of that communication. And so this is where the concept of being a gatekeeper comes into play. A gatekeeper, somebody holding the keys. It's usually thought of as a negative term, but really what it means is I recognize everybody on the team is coming with resources that they can either decide to share or not to share. And every single decision I make throughout the day either facilitates that generous collaboration and sharing of resources, or it shuts it down. And so when it comes to being a general contractor and thinking about how I perform my work day to day, if I can't get the electrician to share the relationship they have with the inspector, I'm not creating an environment where they want to bring everything they have to the table. If I'm not in a meeting and there's a safety director with, the ports project management group, there's a third-party inspector from the city, and there's my drywall contractor. If I don't invite each of them into the conversation and relate their role to the whole project outcome, it's not going to be a thorough and transparent conversation that's focused on the same goal. And the general contractor is that hinge pin. We're the ones who need to take that step to facilitate the communication. And so the gatekeeper idea is that in every action I take, I'm either generously sharing my resources, which can be contractual resources like money, time. It can also be putting a green checkbox on a submittal and sharing the contact information for another trade partner who could help somebody out. And so I need to be constantly focused on that accountability and responsibility and find ways to convince all of our teammates to bring the same resources to the table.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that really kind of sums up the importance of that project manager, in this case, in your projects, kind of the general contractor, but that project management person that's in that seat that is really working with all teams involved in the project. I won't say both. There's a lot of teams involved in all these projects. And you really highlight the importance of every interaction that you either get involved with or you don't get involved with, right? Like you said, if I miss a meeting and something happens, like that could have a real impact on the project. So, for those of you listening, you have to understand the magnitude of your role as a project manager on a project. You're likely dealing with the client. You're likely dealing with maybe the public. You're likely dealing with other subconsultants, right? And you're kind of pulling all their different visions and communications together and kind of filtering them, if you will, in some ways. And that's a lot of times why we do a lot of project management training at EMI. And when I'm talking with our clients, we try to stress them that your project managers are kind of that linchpin in your organization, because what you do for a living is you deliver projects. Like that's your service, that's your product, right? And project managers are making sure that they get delivered, that they're on time, and that they're on schedule. And they have to take all those different variables around that and pull them together and get them going in the same direction. So I like the term gatekeeper for that because it really is a good way to describe it. And I think that there's so much that rides on your ability to pull everything together and interpret it from one party to the next. Sometimes we're probably making people listening to this saying, "Oh, I don't want to be a project manager." No, but if you're someone that really wants to make change happen in your industry, this is the role to make it happen, because you're the one helping to really get these projects done. So I want to dig deeper on the idea of psychological safety here a little bit, because we're engineers. We like metrics. We like KPIs. What are some maybe industry metrics or indicators that you could use to measure that psychological safety and its impacts on a project's success?
I'll talk about this in terms of how a job site runs, because you see the value of psychological safety played out through how people interact with one another. And so we talked earlier about trust. I think trust is developed through a project values system that is led by the deliberate attention or application of a strategy from a project leader. So as I'm developing a project value system on my job site, and I'm clearly articulating to those on the job site my expectation for how they're performing their work, those expectations would be, we come to the morning huddle and we share what we need to be successful for the day, because everybody has an idea of how they can contribute to that goal or not. It's our opportunity to come together and to communicate. You can't have a successful morning huddle without psychological safety. You know there's psychological safety when you're going around from foreman to foreman, and they're not just telling you what you said was on the schedule for the day. They're saying, I really need to get this material into gate 1, but I didn't put it on the delivery calendar. And somebody pipes up and says, oh, it's okay, I'll just move my forklift. Maybe I can help you with that. That is magic when you can create a project value system where other trades are listening and finding ways to contribute to goals. That's relationship building. But when you think about, let's call it a metric of how we define the progression of success within our professional lives, you start with dependence. You're a worker that is dependent on the education that you're receiving and the training you're receiving from your supervisor. Your performance is rated by how well you perform a task that is given to you from other people. Dependence. Once you become a leader, you're usually judged on your independence, your ability to work without the need of other people supporting you, your ability to plan and create on your own. When you have a project values system and you have psychological safety that's in play, you can see examples of moving towards interdependence. And your task is creating and convincing people that that is achievable within a project team and that it's valuable to their outcomes. Because within our industry, we have really clear metrics of success, right? It's like production, safety, maybe innovation so that we can retain and repeat clients. And if we're not showing and demonstrating the value of interdependence towards those means, if we're not showing the value of psychological safety and the sharing of those relationships to those ends, then people aren't going to want to play along. And so the metrics of success are seeing the examples of people depending on one another and offering those resources that they have for the whole project good, because they know they're going to receive the same in return.
That's great. And I think that that's so important because, like you said, if you want people to do something, you need to show them the benefit and the value in doing it, or some of the return that you can achieve from doing it, right? Because people want to understand what's coming out of this, essentially. And without the ability to show what that is, it's really gonna, deter people from taking those steps and really holding it in any kind of importance, right? Especially in the world we live in today, where people want results. They're very results driven. So I think that that's a great way to approach it, and it's a great way to be able to show people that this matters. And if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And this is how you're going to see the results of it. And it's something that, I think it's something that's really hard because in our world, a lot of people are analytically driven, right? I mean, we go to school where we're taught analytics and equations. Even coming back to the stuff I was saying earlier, if we're doing a project management program with a company, we say, hey, listen, for your leadership, you should try to come up with 3 KPIs that you're going to be able to measure this program off of, right? Maybe your variances or your write-offs are going to go down, or, because at the end of the day, we know that developing people is beneficial, but how is the leadership of your organization going to say it was worth it that we did that, right? So sometimes even if you know that there's some value in something, you still need to be able to show it and communicate it to other people. And I think in project management, that's so important.
Think about it in terms of the measurement of an employee or leader's performance. What if we were to change some of the core competencies that we were measuring people on? If you want a KPI here, what if instead of measuring somebody's risk management, or in addition to defining how to measure risk management, you're grading them on perspective taking? You're defining for them that the value that you see as an organization in the person's ability to take another perspective and to incorporate that into a plan is something worth measuring. What if you were going to add into the idea of what does risk management or project management measurement look like? The idea that apprenticeship or training is valuable to the organization, that somebody's ability as a leader is on how they pass on skill sets. You're building that cultural environment where you're telling people that they're being measured on tactics that build teams, psychological safety, and make better risk managers.
That's great. And I also think people inherently want to know what they're being measured on, because then they know what to focus on, right? I mean, in a world where you could get distracted by a million things, if you tell me what you're measuring me on, I'm going to pay attention to those things. I mean, when we do our job descriptions at EMI, we try to come up with clear outcomes for that role, so that if we hire you for something, follow your outcomes, right? When you show up every day, try to generate the outcomes that your job is calling for. I think that that's an important part of just engaging people. All right, I want to talk about the job site a little bit here. How does the physical job site contribute to creating industry-wide changes, especially in terms of inclusivity and mental health?
I've had some great opportunities to contribute to workforce health building initiatives, both nationally and within my organization. And just for scale, we're about 5,000 employees nationwide. And so we've had some really progressive opportunities to develop trainings, but also to have conversations with our employees on the topics of inclusion and mental health, like many organizations over the last few years. Can't go to a conference now without talking about these topics, which is phenomenal, right? They're becoming part of our conversations. But they've entered the industry's conversations typically through, let's say, mental health, human resources, and what kind of health benefits we can offer our employees, right? Or the negative outcomes that result from lack of engagement or burnout or mental health challenges that are now measurable in, especially construction industry statistics. That's been an HR-led initiative for the most part. Sometimes safety. Safety has taken a look at how mental health has, affected presenteeism, and employees' distraction at the job site can cause physical harm to that person or crew because they're not making their best decisions in the moment. Safety and HR or leadership initiatives have a place in our industry. Those processes, however, are only adjacent to the daily processes and systems we've created to achieve the metrics I mentioned earlier, production, right? When we look at how we achieve those metrics, we need to make sure there's alignment of these topics like inclusivity and mental health into the day-to-day processes that people are performing, because we're all shooting for these measurable values that drive business within the industry. And so siloed efforts from industry organizations and companies are only impacting their people so much. And to further that challenge, so we're saying HENSEL PHELPS is a progressive company. We've trained all our leaders on how to recognize and, offset suicide within our industry. This is awesome. We have great inclusion conversations. But then you're spread out over dozens of projects. It's not moving the needle in the industry. And so when I think of the physical job site, I think of the responsibility and opportunity that exists to create a really defined set of values and a place where everybody who comes onto that project site sees in action what inclusion looks like and what a focus towards mental health looks like. And if you can create an experience where even the waterproofer who's there for 3 days understands the expectations for behavior and sees the value of that interdependence, they're going to go to their next project and know that that could be possible. And so I think the job site is a definable geographic space where it can be virtual. With my design teams, over in Philadelphia, we're defining that we're working within a space and a project that has a certain set of values and expectations. And when they go to their next one, they know those are possible. And so I think the physical definition of the job site creates the opportunity for industry change on the topics of like inclusivity, mental health, psychological safety, because it demonstrates what's possible and allows those expectations to be carried from project to project.
That's great. So essentially what my takeaway from that is that there is very good thoughts and intentions around inclusivity and mental health in the industry, but because of the industry is so spread out, there can be some disconnection between that overall philosophy and the work people are doing on a day-to-day basis, unless there are some actions around that in their day-to-day workspaces. So it's essentially taking that vision that's out there and that exists and that people are talking about and kind of bringing it down to the ground. And through the job sites, which could be, your design team working together or on an physical job site, some of those things can be brought into it to connect the vision to like what I'm doing today.
Yes. And because a job site has a clear contractual hierarchy, my drywaller who was trained on inclusivity doesn't have a voice unless the job site creates that voice.
Okay.
And so there's the opportunity to bring forward those teachings and to put them into action that needs to be facilitated at a job site level.
Yeah, another analogy that I would think of for that is when a company sets a strategic plan and strategic goals, that's great. But how do you make sure that Kabri and Anthony, who work at the company, are practicing what is going to get us to that strategy every day? So what we do at EMI is we have like quarterly goals for every single team member. And what I try to do is, and we have a column, and next to each of their goals, we put the number that it ties back to our strategic goal, right? Because then it's a way that you're making sure that what I'm asking you to do today is totally in line with the vision of our company going forward. And so it's a good thing to really think about in terms of the industry and inclusivity and mental health to bring it down to the ground. That's critical stuff. That's great. So speaking of inclusivity, how have your initiatives for LGBTQ plus inclusion and mental health in the workplace, how have they been received, and what changes have you observed as a result of them?
So for the mental health front, my first attempt to bring topics of suicide awareness and anxiety resources to the job site was pre-COVID, which it's great that there's been an explosion of this topic over the last few years, and COVID did a ton to facilitate that because we realized there can't be a job site fence between people's personal and professional lives, right? We're approaching people like people, and people are receptive to the ideas of getting support from their employers. But even at the beginning, the response I received having small group discussions on suicide awareness and mental health support were extremely well received. I'm not an expert. I never claimed to be an expert, but people knowing that there is now permission to recognize the industry's challenges at the job site. At the beginning, even just saying the word suicide on a job site broke these stigmas that have existed forever. And so being able to bring the topics to people and give them resources, it was often met with people coming up to me afterwards and saying, thanks so much. Thanks for this resource card. I was able to use that with my son's basketball, coach. It's not just applicable to the workplace, but it's been extremely well received because you're creating a connection with people's challenges that are, about their whole humanity and experience. Since COVID, the ability to talk about mental health has really been propelled by the understanding that we need to treat our industry differently. One, statistics came out around that time about the challenges within construction for suicide. And so being able to address specifically those statistics and to bring awareness when you ask 200 people on a job site, hey, who here has known somebody in the industry who's died by suicide, and half the hands go up. It used to be people looked at each other in like shock and horror because they never knew that it was such a problem, but they also didn't know other people experienced that pain that came along with it. It's been overall positive. Let me put it that way, because people want to know they're being taken care of. My initiatives with the LGBTQ community within the industry, as well as women within the industry and small businesses, I have changed my thinking from being like, nope, I'm one of the guys, don't treat me differently, to saying there is immense value in identifying communities that exist within our industry and harnessing the passion that exists for our industry by that community. And so, I don't know, there's some great events that happen nationally every year for LGBTQ-owned small businesses and the large public entities that support them. And you get 1,000 people in a room with that same community connection. And you're harnessing these values that already exist for our industry. You're harnessing the pride of work, the apprenticeship and skills transfer, and you're harnessing people's desire to contribute to their communities and families. But now you're just putting it on a loudspeaker because people find connections that they can thrive from, whether with mentorship or with inspiration. And so your question, mental health, LGBTQ initiatives in the workplace, if you can find the connection to people's humanity and inspire them with information that makes them feel like the work they're doing is recognized, it will always be received.
That's great. And it sounds like really a lot of what you've been talking about today and a lot of your answers is really related to, engaging people more at the individual or community level, right? As opposed to just I think over the past few years, like you've talked about, it's become more accepted in our industry, these terms, there's more things happening for them, but it still needs to be drilled down further to the individual level and to building these smaller communities like we talked about on project sites and in these conferences, so that people can still build up enough confidence and see it in real life for them and not just hear it as something that maybe sounds attainable or some people attainable, some people think unattainable, but nonetheless, it's like up there, and we need to get it down here. We need to be able to get some traction with it. So it sounds like that's like a real interesting trend. All right. So I got a couple of the last questions for you here. And one of them related to integrated delivery principles. What are integrated delivery principles and how have they been foundational in your project management approach?
I would define integrated delivery principles as including team collaboration, tactics that reach towards mutual respect, shared risk and reward, and open communication. And so examples of the methodologies that seek that would be design build, which is focused on leveraging the co-creation of a plan to expedite the execution and improve the quality of the outcomes, or lean principles, which focus on continuous improvement via the recognition of people's roles in the processes and outcomes. But I'm particularly passionate about how integrated delivery speaks to a team's willingness to develop those communication pathways that facilitate resource sharing and build trust. And so we talked about how that is not predicated on the type of contract. It's how a team comes together and their willingness, in my opinion. So we've talked about how the deliberate development of a team or project value system and the accountability that comes through being a gatekeeper, recognizing our roles as leaders on the project, and the core competencies that we can look to in our leadership groups. These all are foundational in how I think about project management. We want to make sure that we're recognizing what it is that we can do to impact our teams, the greater teams, not just our specific teams. But one aspect maybe that we haven't covered is an important reason why I think integrated delivery principles are important. This is beyond the making of money, right? Or a quality outcome, which comes down to business and money. But integrated delivery principles should always be a reminder that we are here to support the craft workers. Everything we do, everything we design, every schedule we build has to support the people putting the work in place. I'm a superintendent, so I'm partial to those relationships, But the reality is that our industry still runs on the hands of people performing the work. And so making sure that integrated delivery principles, the trust we're building, the outcomes we're seeking, are focused on how the work gets accomplished, and that is people. And so making sure that my management approach is always geared towards improving the outcomes for those people preserves the health of our industry and increases the value of the outcomes.
That's great. No, I love that it's a very people. I always say that the biggest misnomer about project management is the word people isn't in the phrase, because you're not managing any project successfully if you can't interact with your team the right way, internal and external stakeholders, not just your team. So I really love that approach, and making sure that you think about that, you think about the team, and you think about how you can, really as a project manager, you have to get the most out of your team, and you got to put them in the best position to succeed. And how can you do that? And the one thing that you reminded me of when you were answering that question was, as a design engineer myself, I was lucky that I spent the early years of my career in the field, on sites. But the challenge is, if designers come out of school and they just go into design and they don't get that field experience, then the idea of being able to set everything up for those that are going to be putting it in place on sites, right, doing the craft work, it's harder for designers to do that because they don't know what that entails, which is why I highly recommend that all firms out there, if you're a leader in a firm and you're listening, you have to have some kind of on-site program for your younger recent graduates, because they need to understand the design role, and they need to understand the construction role, and even the planning role. All those roles are important in the process. And I think that having that perspective can help the team, more teamwork, better teamwork, throughout your projects. And I don't know what I would have done as a design engineer without that knowledge, because I knew how things were going to be put together when I was designing them. And that's really invaluable. So
I love that recommendation. I too learned, I went to school for engineering, and coming out of school, I didn't know anything about construction methods. I have no history of construction in my family. And my first internship just blew my mind at the amount of skills that come together to create the projects that get built. And it's an incredibly powerful recommendation to say that all leaders need to experience that process from beginning to end, and how that gets executed at a field level.
Yeah, it's invaluable, I think. All right, so last question for this segment, and then we'll wrap up with our pitfall segment in just a minute. What's a final piece of advice that you can give to engineering professionals that are really looking to excel in project management and kind of follow a similar path to yours, getting very involved in project management?
So skill sets, methodologies, and outcomes are really important. I love a good podcast with applicable strategies, but we need to be rooted in that humanity of this stressful, production-oriented, and complicated industry and the work that we do. We rely on those people bringing the skill sets together. And so we must recognize the emotions that drive decision-making. I was recently in a writing project with an industry acquaintance and now friend, Cody Fournier, and she said it so succinctly. I don't think I've ever heard something that's more true. Our role as leaders is to make people feel less afraid. We have a lot of technical skills that do that. It's how we hone and share our expertise. It's how we include our teammates in coordination, and how we recognize our teammates' role in the overall plan. But if we make people feel less afraid in the conversations we have and the decisions that we make, we will be able to collaborate more and produce greater outcomes with the trust that results.
That's awesome. No, that's very powerful. And I think that is what a leader needs to do. I think first and foremost is make the people around them comfortable to do their best and give them that confidence, because sometimes people have the abilities, but they're not totally ready yet or confident enough in themselves to take that next step. And the more you can bring them along and instill that confidence and kind of empower them, that can dictate whether or not they kind of grow into that project manager that they can become, or that person that they can become. So I think that that's a great way to say it. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with Kabri. We'll just ask her one more question around PM pitfalls, and then we will wrap it up. All right, we are back with Kabri. She's a project superintendent at HENSEL PHELPS, and we've spoken a lot today about inclusivity in the world of engineering and construction. You know, we've talked a lot about taking some of these big picture visions that seem to be going in the right direction, but still we need to bring them down to the ground so people can actually feel it and take action on them on a daily basis. And the last question that I have for you, Kabri, is around project management pitfalls. You've done a lot of work in project management. What would you say is one of the bigger pitfalls that you see a lot of PMs, fall into or are challenged with? And how would you recommend overcoming them or avoiding them in this situation?
The biggest pitfalls that I've seen by project management is usually based on the belief that their control of information equals control of project outcomes. And so this hoarding of information is usually an expression of power, or it's just out of fear that the information is going to be mishandled. But it results in miscommunication. It results in lack of trust. And it usually results in unhappy outcomes because people don't feel that they understand your motive behind the work that you're doing. And so just a typical everyday example, I'm married to a structural engineer as well. And so I took this from her. A general contractor orders the steel before the permit comments are received and doesn't tell the structural engineer. This results in dozens of detailing RFIs being sent to the structural engineer while they're trying to finish up the design requests from the architect and the owner. The lack of communication about that decision has created an immense amount of work, mistrust, cost implications, and a lack of the ability to offset the owner costs that they're trying to actively VE, the repurchasing of steel, and impacts to the schedule. And so controlling the information and thinking that sharing it will result in a negative outcome when really it will result in collaboration and trust building is the pitfall that you want to avoid.
That's very powerful because it is something that I see on a very regular basis with project managers, just feeling like if they can hold on to everything, they're going to be in control. In fact, I'll be honest with you, that's an analogy for even leadership in engineering, because I had a manager in my career that had the same approach. Like, I need to kind of hold everything close to the vest because I kind of don't want Anthony to go over me and climb the ladder over me, right? And that was really stagnated my career, and it made me kind of almost switch career paths a little bit. So I think that generally speaking, as a project manager and as a leader, you need to be sharing, trusting, and help people grow. And if you do that, you're going to grow. I mean, that's just the way it works. And sometimes you can't see that. You can't see that the next step there. So, well, Kabri, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your super busy schedule to spend it with us here on the Engineering Project Management Podcast. Your thoughts are really powerful, and I hope that our listeners can kind of take action on some of them, and we can really move some of these important initiatives and trends forward in our industry and give people a more realistic opportunity to feel them and kind of drive them forward in their day-to-day lives. So thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you for the invite. This has been a really enjoyable conversation.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Kabri. She is a dynamic project manager, and obviously the topic she talked about today really, I believe, will make a change in our industry for the positive going forward, and we're so thrilled to have her. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better project managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.